My name's Griffin, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ and a recovering addict. And it's an honor to be here. I'm really excited to be here. And I just want to thank God for giving me the opportunity to be here, because I got so nervous when I was asked to come here, because I've spoke before, but it's been a while, through the whole pandemic, and I know God has given me a lot to share. But also I was thinking, I have, here recently, I'd definitely say within the past few years of my recovery, I've really been consciously working really hard to deepen my faith and to be more obedient to God. And so something that I was really excited to come here tonight was just to proclaim my faith and my belief in Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And I believe Jesus is Lord and Jesus is King. And I try to live that every day and follow Him and ask Him what He would have me to do. And so I know I didn't get asked to do this for no reason. So I truly believe in being obedient to God. And for that, I'm thankful that I have the willingness and the courage to get up here through those feelings of nervousness, and good people in my life that value having me in their life, like Matt. So I was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee. I came from a family that definitely had some hurts and hang-ups. I would say, I think that I came from a family of believers. I don't know if they really lived that out in my actual home, but I know my grandparents were very faithful. I know Mom tried to get me to go to church when I was younger, and my dad and my mom divorced. They had a tough time. They divorced when I was around 11 years old, and from there we split up households. And I'm not going to spend too much time qualifying, but that's really where it took off for me, right? I saw that my dad was using, my mom was having a hard time with alcohol, and so those things were just normal, commonplace for me in my life. And so I started heading down that road, doing as they did. And by the time I was in high school, I was fully addicted to just about everything. I dropped out of high school, stayed out. I got to the point where I was just basically a derelict, couldn't work, couldn't live, didn't have a place to stay. I remember me and my father were living in a house with no running water and electricity, and just living in filth. And I ended up breaking my neck, and going through all that to get to a place where finally, and this is where I think about that song where it chased me down, as I was just sitting in a bed one day, and I remember my body, I was 23, but my body was basically giving up on me. It was failing me. And I remember thinking, I got to do something different. And I didn't have a smartphone at the time. It was like 2013, so there were smartphones out at the time, but there was no internet or anything like that. So I got this old crusty phone book, and I picked up the phone book and called a clinic at that time. And called the clinic, just started crying my eyes out to the secretary or the receptionist. And she was like, I think you need some help, but maybe we're not the place for that. And she got me on the phone. I ended up going to treatment. And so I ended up going down to treatment. And I remember I got baptized for the first time in treatment. I got baptized in a saltwater swimming pool down in Florida. And I definitely think there was some seeds planted before that time. Like I don't think I ever was angry with God or didn't believe, that there was a God, but I definitely was so far away from it. You couldn't see any resemblance of, I think, a godly way of life in me. But when I got there, I was like, I'm going to try to just completely abandon myself, and that's one of my favorite definitions of surrender, is to abandon oneself entirely to. And so when I read that definition, I remember thinking, I'm really going to submit to this. And so I went to treatment. I stayed clean for a little while. I remember thinking, I could do this one thing, that was different. At least I quit all that other things. And so I ended up doing that, and realized I can't do that either. So I was like, okay, they were right about the abstinence. And so things progressively got better in my life, where I got to, I got a job. I went from being homeless and had a job, had a place to stay, and had a sense of purpose in my life. I started going to church occasionally, but got the dog, got the girlfriend, and all that stuff, and I was living for that. I was living for the things of this world. That was the thing. I feel like I had that God-shaped hole inside of me that, I thought, man, if I just quit the drugs and start living like these other people are living, things will get better. And it did a little bit. That's how I was judging my recovery, is based, well, I went from being homeless to now I have a home. I went from being jobless to now I have a job. I went from being, single to now I have this relationship. And things progressively got better, but what I realized is I was putting all my faith in those things. And so when those things started to fall apart, I was still that scared little boy, and still very insecure, lacking faith and trust in God and His plan for my life. And so when all that fell apart, I got to a point where I just wanted to die. And that was probably the rock bottom for me, where I really surrendered to working a program of recovery. And I think it's really cool. I've been to CR before. I always call it CR. I was sitting there and I was looking at Celebrate Recovery, and I was thinking that's actually a pretty cool title, to celebrate recovery, because I was thinking I have so much to celebrate every day when I see the redeeming power of God in my life, and what Jesus has done in my life. So at that moment, I started to abandon myself entirely to following Him. And I got into an anonymous fellowship, got a sponsor, started working these principles and steps in my life. I admitted that I was powerless over my addiction, that my life had become unmanageable, and I came to believe, right, that something greater than me could work in my life. I came to believe, and I'm grateful that my sponsor was a believer in Jesus, and I got to see him deepen his faith and his obedience and his walk with Christ. And it gave me the footsteps to follow, because where I was coming from, I had no resemblance of what that looked like. From my childhood, I didn't see my parents weren't trying to follow in Christ's footsteps. They weren't trying to practice these principles. They tried the best they could. And I know I was loved very much. But so I started living that way, and when I started practicing these Christian principles in my life and seeing the Word and just having the faith of a child, because I'm still not that well versed in the Bible. I read the daily devotional every day. I just recently started going to a church with my family, my wife and my daughters. And we're looking to partner with that church and actually go to small groups and develop relationships. Everything that I learned from that anonymous fellowship, that's what my sponsor told me. He's like, well, if you're going to live this way, you got to find a home group, So I had to find the home group church. And so we found that, and now it's like I got to get involved, get a service position. So now I'm starting to go to the small groups and share myself and get connected with these people and networking, everything I learned in those anonymous fellowships. But I would say that I went from having no hope. Like, my hope at one time was to maybe get my own script, right? Instead of using somebody else's. Like, I would get a script of something, and then I would get my own Section 8 waiver to where I had that, and maybe a PlayStation 3. To now, like, everything I've been through in my recovery, when I furthered this walk and just trying to surrender more and more of my life, turning my will and my life over to the care of. So I came to believe that there's something better, there's something bigger than me, and maybe this will work for me. Just doing these simple suggestions will work in my life too, instead of me trying to hold everything and do everything myself. And then I made the decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of, right? When I really started saying, Jesus, take this from me. Like, turning, not just the drugs, but turning over this codependency that I had, and this heavy reliance on things outside of myself, other people, and acceptance, and the status symbols, the prestige, the wanting this position, this much money, this whatever it was, the shinier car, because I was so ashamed of this, like, rusted car I had, that I needed a shinier car, all these things. And I stand in that. So that was like an action for me. It wasn't just the prayer, it was walking in that. So when I had these urges or these feelings or this fear of what's going to happen if I do this, and I've always done these things this way, I started to bust a move, right? And stand in that. And just for that day, just for that moment, I was not continuing to live the way I used to. And that's where a direction of my life changed. And I did make a searching and fearless moral inventory. And I admitted the exact natures of my wrongs to myself, to God, and another human being. And I started praying for God to remove these defects of character in my life. And that was huge for me because I remember in the sixth step, which I know we do the principles here. I'm just sharing my experience. This is what God gave me to share. So my grandmother was very ill. And I went from robbing my grandmother. I remember borrowing the debit card for the phone bill that was due every week when I didn't even have a phone, and all these things, to where now I was a couple of years clean. My grandmother was very ill with cancer, and my mom was struggling really bad, watching her mom, deteriorate. And I was struggling with, now I've committed to this way of life, but I still have these desires to act out in the area of relationships and self-harm, even though I wasn't using drugs at the time. So I remember when my grandmother got admitted to the hospital, I chose to go and stay with her in the hospital, and they discharged her back home on hospice. And I stayed 27 nights with my grandmother, and that whole time I remember laying with my grandmother in her bed and listening to her body basically eat itself because she was starving to death from a blockage caused in her colon by lymphoma. And I remember praying to God when I would hear. Every time I heard her stomach, I would just pray to God. And what's amazing is through that hardship, right, God gave me, so God revealed something to me. And it was that I was really good at caring for an individual going through that. And so at that time, there was a seed planted to me that, hey, maybe, you should be a nurse. Maybe you should look into doing this because I had friends that were telling, I didn't believe it at the time, but I had friends that would tell me, hey, you're doing something that not a lot of people could probably do. I think you have a gift for this. And so that planted the seed. I remember when my grandmother passed away, I went from being the person that, robbed and stole from my family to being the person that was the first person they asked to give my grandmother's eulogy. And I gave my grandmother's eulogy and left out from there. And about a year later, I think I found out about Tennessee Reconnect, and I started going to school to pursue a career in nursing. I started working in treatment and helping people, begin the recovery process in substance abuse treatment. And then that was like, I want to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And so I set out to do that. Now I'm still in school, and I'll begin the nursing program this January. So hopefully by next fall, I'll be a registered nurse. It's the first step in my journey to becoming a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And through that, also, I gained a closer relationship with my mother. Shortly after that, my father passed away from the disease of addiction. And I was thinking about how just amazing God is in that, because addiction is a great thief. But so what it came down to was like me and my father, all we had, the recent memories were just these bad, horrible stories we had, from where he was in his addiction. Well, when he passed away, and I gave his eulogy as well, and we also I made it a celebration of life and really to glorify God. And that song, Reckless Love, I actually had it played at my dad's funeral. I realized I started getting these things back, right? The memories of how good my dad was and the things that I'm his seed, And I started honoring my father and realizing my father in heaven, right, had called me for something greater. And I set out to lean into God that much more. And that's when I saw one of the principles. I forgot what it was verbatim, but it was basically, happy are those that mourn because they know they'll be comforted. And that was my experience with that process, is in the loss of those two people in my life caused me a lot of pain and grief, but I leaned into the edges, because that's what my sponsor always told me, lean into the edges, lean into God. And when I did, He always blessed me and showed me something, and there was more to be revealed. And moving past that, I got into a relationship again. And I went from being a single bachelor causing havoc and just acting a wild young man to now I started practicing Christian principles in my life, like abstinence before marriage, living separately, until we were married. And the year before last, I realized, like, hey, I'm going to ask this girl to marry me. Like, she's my best friend. She loves God, and I love her, and I want to love her like Christ loves the church. And so I set out to do that, and I asked her to marry me. And then as soon as we got married, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and we were wondering, like, what are we going to do with this venue? What are we going to how is this even going to work? I've never even been married, I've been in like 5 weddings, been a best man twice, but I've never, didn't know what we were going to do. So I just knew I valued family, and I wanted my great aunt, because after my father passed away, I started developing this relationship with my great aunt. I wanted her to be there, and she pretty much locked herself down during the pandemic. And so we decided to get married in her front yard. And my aunt and uncle, my uncle's a pastor. And they're actually both missionaries now. They were living in Poland, but they just recently moved to London. So my uncle married me in my great aunt's front yard. And then we just got, to a place where things have been restored in the area of finances, more secure, and had more opportunity. And we were setting out to get a house. And right after that, less than a week after we got married, my great aunt calls us and says, Griffin, I'm going to have to check myself into assisted living. She's 87. She was having a hard time. She's been independent, lived all over alone her entire life. But she said, I'm going to go to be in Cleveland, Tennessee, and I want to give you and Brittany my house. And so within a week of getting married, we were given a house. And the reason why I share this is because I know when I surrender these things, right? Like, I'm not responsible for my success. I'm responsible for my surrender. So in that moment, I was so overwhelmed with such a blessing that I knew, right, that came from God. Like, you don't just inherit things like that. That was like a supernatural inheritance with no grief or mourning, because my great Aunt Wanda was still there to share all this with us. Something that my wife had been through, she didn't have custody of her children, And so we were given this house, and I knew that there was something about to happen. And shortly after we were given this house, we tried to honor that blessing and restore it and do the best we could with it. And then within 2 months of getting the house, my wife got full custody of her daughters restored back to her. And so I know now, right, that's why we were given that house, is because we needed to have a home for our family. And seeing that happen and living in that blessing, right? I started to hear things, like God fathers the orphan, and their father is not around. Their father is not with us anymore. And so now we've been together for a year. I went from being a bachelor to being a husband and a stepfather within about a year. So, and I know there's a huge responsibility with that. And so as I lean into that, and I rely on God and rely on the men that God puts in my life who are more experienced in that area, as we were restoring the house and getting this relationship restored, getting the 9-year-old in school, the 13-year-old in school, I felt it like I married their mother, and they didn't get to choose me necessarily, but we just about a month ago, I got the retainer down to where hopefully by January I will have legally adopted these 2 girls, and they will be legally my daughters. And another amazing thing that's happened is about a month ago, my wife came to me and let me know she was pregnant. So also by next year, not only will they legally be my daughters, but we'll have another sibling as well, another child in the house. So all this has happened just in the short time that I've been clean. I've been clean a little over 6.5 years, and I'm excited because I feel like I'm just getting started, and I get to see and celebrate the recovery, see what God is doing in my life. And the way I try to honor that to the best of my ability is to pray and to follow him and to seek him out, because like I said, I'm not that well versed in the word, but I believe it. I believe it. Even the parts that I haven't read yet, I believe it because I see it in my life. And I'll see where my experience matches the literature. And I'll read something like, that's happened to me. And then when it hasn't happened to me, I believe it will happen to me. And I believe that God works all things out for the good of those who love him. So I love God, and I try to do that every day in my actions. I try to love myself and love others, I try to practice responsibility, integrity, steadfastness, forgiveness is a huge one that I had to learn. And I try to practice humility, And just earlier this week, I was really praying for that because I did a devotional that was talking about the Hebrew word for humility and how that translates into your God-given place, and having that really standing in my God-given place. And that's when I know that humility is like a byproduct of that. So really trying to be obedient to that. So right now I'm just focused on things are pretty awesome right now. Coming from 6.5 years ago to having a beautiful family, beautiful relationships in my life. I went from I woke up this morning from a text from my mom telling me how proud she is of me. My birthday was yesterday, so I just turned 31 yesterday. And I remember really being a terrorist to my mom. And so when she tells me how proud she is of me and how much joy I bring to her, I know that's God too. I know that is. And so this process of recovery and being obedient and surrendering to God's will and praying for the knowledge and the power, for the knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out and living in that principle, I see the tangible evidence in my life every day. And that's what that's basically where I'm at now. That's what I try to do. I try to just do that every day. And I'm going to keep coming back. I'm going to keep celebrating, recovery. And I'll be at church this Sunday and hopefully learn a little bit more. And try to be obedient to that. And I'm really grateful to be here and share with you all. Thank you all for having me. And I guess at this point, I'm supposed to... is there anybody here that would love to start this process and pick up a blue chip? All right, if you do, they're up here on the speakers. You can get them at any time. And thanks for having me.